This was a project started with Professor Lamin Sane and our friend and brother Mike. Dr. Glerop is the one who is directing the project now at Yale. So we are doing this in partnership with you. So thank you, Mike. Good to have you today. Thank you. We are also honored to have our guest speakers from Uganda and from Ghana. We are so blessed to have Dr. Walusimbi Abdul Hafiz. Dr. Walusimbi Abdul Hafiz is from Uganda and is Ugandan by nationality. He holds a PhD, a master's, and a bachelor's degree in Islamic law. He also holds an executive master's degree in project management. He has a diploma in law, a diploma in education, and a diploma in Islamic banking and finance. Dr. Hafiz is a senior lecturer at the Department of Sharia Islamic University in Uganda. Also lecturer at the Department of Religion and Peace Studies at the Makerere University. Dr. Hafiz is also director of Al-Haq Sharia Advisory and Consultancy Bureau and is the vice chairman and chairman of the Academic Committee Insurance Training College. Dr. Hafiz has published quite a bit and several articles in family law, international humanitarian law, and also in the area of Islamic banking. And he specializes in comparative laws also and international humanitarian law. Dr. Hafiz is here with our sister, Hajia, whom I will introduce more fully later. Hajia will be speaking alongside Dr. Hafiz, but Dr. Hafiz will go first. So I will introduce Dr. Hafiz for now and then introduce Hajia when it is her turn to speak. Today's topic is religion and corruption, the Islamic perspective. Religion and corruption, the Islamic perspective. We had this same topic from the Christian perspective last month, and we are having this one today from the Islamic perspective. We are hoping to explore what it is that Islam has to say on the issue of corruption, what resources are there within the Islamic tradition in the fight against corruption, but also how is the Muslim community affected and grappling with some of these issues, not just the Muslim community, but the wider society in which we live in. So with that, I want to turn it over now to Dr. Hafiz to start with his presentation. He has 25 minutes to present, and I will moderate the time and will give him heads up when his time is about to run out. And then we can have our sister Hajia also come on to give the second presentation. So Dr. Hafiz, over to you. If you want to share your screen, this is the time that you can do that.
Thank you, the moderator of this presentation. I want to take this opportunity to welcome you all to our presentation today. And I want to start my presentation by expressing my sincere gratitude to the organizers of this event for having chosen such an important topic at such a time when the African continent is in dire need of such presentation. I also want to start by registering my gratitude to the organizers for having given me the opportunity to represent my faith, the Islamic faith, to share with you my little knowledge about what Islam provides as far as corruption is concerned. In my introduction, I wish to make it clear that it is not a disputable fact that corruption has a very big negative effect on development, and therefore there is no need to emphasize that. Several studies, either at individual or at organizational level, have established a very strong relationship or correlation between corruption, poverty, illiteracy, and underdevelopment. But also at the same time, we are all much aware that there has been several national and international interventions and initiatives which are aiming at combating corruption. But at the same time, we also believe and contend that humanity is seeing little results that are being yielded in those efforts. On a sad note, there has been some cases where the political and the legal instruments which were founded and established in order to fight corruption have been found instead to give a cover-up and therefore promote corruption. This, in one way, has been proven to be defeating the very purpose why these establishments, these initiatives were founded. Having given that kind of introduction, this justifies the need to seek interventions outside the political arena, outside the political ambit, because a number of happenings, a number of occasions which have taken place in the world have really proved beyond doubt that faith or religion can actually provide a good remedy. Faith or religion has been proved to be a source of relief. It has been proved to be a fallback position for many challenges that have affected the social institutions. But before I could go into my presentation, I wish to make it categorically clear that since this kind of initiative is being spearheaded by religious leaders, we need to abide by the legal maxims below. One of them is an empty hand has nothing to give. The second is you cannot get blood out of stones. And the third is charity begins at home. It therefore goes without saying that if at all religious leaders are to preach anti-corruption messages to the brethren, then they have to act exemplary. Ladies and gentlemen, I also felt it important that I try to figure out what the problem is in this presentation. When we are talking about problem statements, our traditional approach of identifying a problem has been by looking at the ideal situation, then you look at the real, then you look at the consequences. So, looking at the ideal, we all agree that a corrupt-free environment is a significant factor for development. And therefore, whenever we have a corrupt-free environment, we are likely to have the dignified treatment and equitable human basic needs extended to humanity. We also agree that corruption is a cancer, and that kind of cancer does not only affect the corrupter, but its effects are spread to sectors of the society. Therefore, it is also established that the effects of this kind of cancer does not only create the socio-economic imbalances, but it also breeds hatred, enmity between the poor and the rich, between the haves and the have-nots, between the indigents and the affluent. Corruption has been found to be a great element that fuels political instability, especially in such a situation where the victims of corruption have been aspiring to reclaim their dignified rights. Brothers and sisters, humanity has reached a stage of almost losing hope from the political establishments that have been situated. Because in many situations, such initiatives, such interventions which are political, to a great extent have failed to walk their talk. That is why faith or religion is being seen as a final result that is going to provide solace, that is going to provide consolation to those who have lost hope. In many situations, you know that it is only faith that has the potential to connect people to their Creator and also assure such people who have lost hope of God's ultimate justice and recompense. Ladies and gentlemen, the role of faith in restoring issues in the community has even been recognized by political leaders themselves. Because in many situations when things go out of their control, even after misbehaving, even after being found in corruption tendencies, many cases have been realized whereby they call for the divine intervention through conducting of national prayers, where they call religious leaders to assemble so that they can invoke the divine intervention. This presentation, therefore, it is meant to establish how far religion can intervene and which kind of role that the Islamic faith can play in order to fight corruption. But we also need to understand what corruption is. I have taken an approach of not giving one statement that defines corruption. I have actually taken the approach of defining corruption by its ingredients or components. Several scholars have looked at corruption from different perspectives. Corruption broadly covers all human acts that contravenes justice. It has also been seen as a broad range of behavioral distortions that threaten the social, the economic, and the ecological balance. Corruption is a global financial crime that involves abuse of power, receiving and giving bribes, and violation of public trust. Corruption has been associated with mischief, and to some scholars and researchers, corruption is a synonym of destruction. But before I go into the Islamic approach of addressing corruption, I wish first of all to look at the historical Afro-religious position on corruption, so that at the end of the day, we can establish the fact whether or not corruption in Africa, especially coupled with religion, is it inherent or it is just acquired? The proceedings from the Islamic perspective, the proceedings or what took place during the first Islamic Christianity contact in Africa alluded to the fact that corruption is not welcome to our dear continent. As far as 613/14 CE, the followers of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, migrated from Mecca to seek refuge in the Christian kingdom of Aksum, the present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, and formerly known as Abyssinia. In fact, from the perspective of Islamic history, this is the first migration of Muslims outside Arabia. What was the purpose of their migration? They were migrating because they were safeguarding their freedom of expression from the tyranny of the pagans. That was the time when Prophet Muhammad has come to Arabia and preaching the message of monotheism. And the pagans who were believing in idol worship, they instead started fighting him. When the persecution has reached its climax, the Prophet, peace be upon him, decided to let a section of his followers to leave Arabia to go and seek refuge in Ethiopia or Eritrea today. But one needs to ask him or herself, what was the prophet's rationale of choosing Abyssinia? The prophet's choice of Abyssinia was not accidental. Instead, it was substantiated, qualified, and justified by the trust that the prophet had in the Christian king known as Negus, who was known by the names of Arma. When the prophet was sending away his people, his followers, to go and seek their refuge in Abyssinia, where there was a Christian king, he told them, there is a king who does not accept injustice and oppression before him. There is a king who does not condone to corruption. In fact, the prophet's trust was not betrayed, because when King Negus welcomed the refugees or those who were running for asylum, and just after a very small time, the pagans sent their envoy carrying a bribe so that he can surrender the refugees back to Mecca so that they can continue being persecuted. What happened is that the prophet's trust in the Christian king known as Negus was not betrayed, because this king, flanked by his bishops, rejected the bribe, and he decided to allow the Muslims to settle in Abyssinia freely and comfortably. In my opinion, ladies and gentlemen, this is a clear proof that alludes to the fact that corruption in Africa is unacquired but not an inherent practice. But how can we categorize corruption. Muslim scholars made an attempt to provide the taxonomy of corruption. And the intention of this kind of categorization was not to leave any room for corruption tendencies that have not been addressed. Muslim scholars have categorized corruption into managerial corruption, the economic, the financial, the political, ecological, and social. However, when you look keen into this kind of taxonomy, you can conclude that corruption can be categorized into three broad categories. That is the moral, the social, the economic, and the political. Let me quickly move through these three categories. Moral corruption, it covers all tendencies which happen to divert from the acceptable moral norms and standards. And when you look at moral corruption, it is actually the foundation that leads to other kinds of corruption. That is the socio-economic and the political. Immoral tendencies such as dishonesty, deception, arrogance, selfishness, among others, all these are manifestations of moral corruption, and as far as Islamic law is concerned, all of them are prohibited. There is a lot of emphasis that is given in Islam about high moral integrity, and there is a lot of injunction in Islam which prohibit all kinds of misbehavior, all kinds of immoral conduct. What about the socio-economic corruption? You know that man's greed, man's selfishness has led him to delve into a lot of socio-economic evils. Socio-economic corruption manifests in a number of ways. Nepotism that leads to unjust discrimination, bribery, which is taken to be the epitome of corruption, hoarding of trade items, inflation of costs, monopoly, among others. It also manifests in acts such as theft, the misuse of public funds, forgery, waste and misappropriation, and embezzlement of public funds, among others. When we look at each of these tendencies, each of them has a specific prohibition in the books of Islamic law. But in the interest of time, I decided to zero on the general prohibitions. Quran chapter 2, which is Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 188 says, "And do not eat up your property among yourselves for vanities, nor shall it as a bait for the judges, with the intent that you may eat up wrongfully and knowingly a little of other people's property." Generally, this verse is prohibiting the socio-economic corruption. And because the judges have a very great entrance point into this kind of the socio-economic corruption, that is why the institution of justice, the institution of judges, has been singled out in this verse. The Prophet, peace be upon him, mentioned one of the serious forms of socio-economic corruption, and that is bribery. When he said, Allah casts the one who offers bribe as well as the one who accepts it. And in another version, even the person who acts as a mediator between the bribe and the one who is receiving the bribe is also being cast. The third type is political / managerial corruption. This manifests in many acts, such as abuse of power, violation of public trust, giving and receiving bribes, among others, substitution of nepotism for meritocracy, among others. This is also prohibited in very many forms. But in the interest of time, I singled out one incident in which one of the public servants by names of Utaiba was sent to go and execute a state duty of collecting zakah. When he collected zakah, he was also given some gifts. When he came back to report to the Prophet, he said that this is the zakah that I have collected. This is for you. And these gifts are mine. The Prophet came out clearly and said, you should have remained in your house or the house of your father and mother, and then we see whether you will receive such kind of gifts. This was the highest demonstration of disapproving such acts that are being made or that are being conducted by public servants, which are actually opening a room for corruption. There are many, many other examples on this. For instance, Umar is the second caliph who prohibited gifts to judges with the purpose of closing the avenue to bribery. Since corruption has adverse effects, you will find out that the manifestations of these three categories happen to interrelate, happen to go into this and that. As I'm winding up my presentation, how does Islamic law approach the phenomenon of corruption? To a great extent, Islamic literature has addressed corruption from two broad perspectives. The first one is the normative, that is emphasizing the morality, emphasizing discipline, because as you know, Islamic texts to a great extent, they are ethic-centric. They set high moral standards on ethics, on the norms of behavior which govern the personal, professional, and business lives. And that is why Islam provides such a normative framework that gives weight, impact, and legitimacy to anti-corruption tendencies. The Islamic moral framework has a lot of moral obligations. Let me try to single out some in the interest of time. Number one is soul purification, soul reformation. And this is where you find the text of Quran emphasizing that we need to purify our souls. That is where you find the Prophet emphasizing that in the body there is a flesh. When that flesh becomes good, when it becomes reformed, the whole body shall become good. But if it gets spoiled, then the whole body shall get spoiled, and that is the soul. Also, Islam has emphasized equitable sharing and distribution of wealth so that it can close that door to corruption. This is where Quran chapter 2 verse 167 provides that give out of what you have earned so that the rich can be mindful about the poor, and in such a way there shall be social or community cohesion. Quran also emphasizes documentation and certification in order to close the door or to close the avenues for corruption. Quran also emphasizes the fulfillment of agreements and duties, because it is a form of corruption when somebody does not fulfill the covenants, the contracts, and the agreements. Quran also emphasizes that those people who are bankrupt, those who are in a disadvantaged position, they should be given respite. They should be relieved so that they can live in such a dignified manner. Quran also has emphasized that we need to explore the lawful and also abstain from the unlawful. But most important is Quran calls for public accountability. Allah says, وَقُلِ عِمَلُوا, you should work. فَسَيَرَ اللَّهُ عَمَلَكُمْ, Allah shall see your work. وَرَسُولُهُ, and the messenger. وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ, and the believers. Meaning that the believers have a stake in what we are doing. Meaning that we have to make our accountability not only to our Creator, but also to our fellow beings who are living with us. In the interest of time, there are also many other manifestations of the Islamic moral framework. For instance, the restriction of lawful means. Islam has reached the level of restricting some of the things which are lawful because they are feared to be an evasive legal device that can prevent corruption. For instance, Islam in some situations prohibits taking of gifts, involvement in trade, as we can see that in many records of the precedents of Islamic law. Therefore, having said that, let us look at the legal and administrative framework. Because in many cases, Islam first of all starts by looking at the moral framework, whereby a person who is having such corruption tendencies is at first being talked to. It is more of admonition. It is more of talking about him so that he can wake up, so that he can have a moral realization of his character. But if that fails, then the legal and administrative framework has to be enforced. It has to be invoked. And under that, Islamic law has a number of establishments and structures. Talk about, for instance, community policing that has been known through the institution of Hisbah. Hisbah is an Arabic word which is used to mean looking around, moving around into the community, into the society, to find out the cases of maladministration and monitoring and regulating and supervising the business in public offices. Another way how the legal and administrative framework can be handled is invoking the judicial arm of the state in order to prosecute the corrupt suspects under the wide scope of ta'zir, which is known as the discretional crimes. There has been a lot of record to this. For instance, it is known that when he appointed someone, when he appointed a public officer, he could record his possession at the time of appointment. Then after a certain time, he could also go and monitor how much such officer has accumulated. And in such a situation, he could even reach the extent of confiscating that addition so that he can close the door to corruption. In Islam also, there is a court that is known as the Board of Grievances, which is a special court that has been put there in order to try the high-profile corrupt officers. Ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, my conclusion is Islam has handled the corruption tendencies, first of all, by giving a broad categorization of what constitutes corruption. Number two, by handling it both from the moral framework and also the legal and the administrative one. That is why, as I'm summing up my presentation, I wish to make the following recommendations. In order to combat corruption tendencies from the Islamic perspective, there is need to emphasize the adherence to moral values at a family level. Because you all know that the way how we are brought up by our families, those values that we learned from home, in many cases, these are the ones which we translate. These are the ones which we transfer to the community. The second recommendation is about reforming the social values and grounding them in such an appropriate concepts of social justice and linking them with the broader worldview. I am hereby advocating for moral education that can be incorporated in the mainstream educational curricula, which can be handled at all academic levels. And finally, establishing the training academies in which the public officers can be grounded, can be trained, and they are required to attend lessons and managerial ethics that can help them to keep away from corruption. My last greater recommendation is we need to listen to our internal call. We need to listen to our innermost self. And I hereby end my presentation by this quotation from Professor Patrice Lumumba. He says, in Japan, a corrupt person kills himself. In China, they will kill him. In Europe, they will jail him. In Africa, he will present himself for election. We cannot afford such a situation as long as the religious leaders, the religious institutions are in establishment. In the interest of time, allow me to stop here by thanking you very much for paying attention to my presentation. Thank you very much for the attentive listening.
Thank you, Dr. Hafiz, for presenting with such depth and clarity. This is such a powerful presentation, and lots of things that you said that are thought-provoking. And I like the way you ended, because I was going to say you should recommend that we should open more prisons and lock people up. So thank you. We are so grateful for that. We now go on to introduce our sister Hajia Aishetu Abdul Kader. Hajia Aishetu Abdul Kader, she's a Ghanaian and is also an educationist. And so, Hajia, I'm sure you heard Dr. Hafiz clearly. Let's go back to moral education. So, educationists, the ball is in your court. Hajia is also the National Secretary for the Federation of Muslim Women Association in Ghana. Hajia is also known for her work as an advocate for women empowerment. And in lots of these corruption cases that we talk about, most of the victims of corruption are always women and children and the vulnerable. They are those who pay the highest price. So Hajia, over to you, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Prof. I say good afternoon and salamu alaikum to all of the panel members. Indeed, I'm very grateful to Allah for making it possible today as a blessed day for us to meet, to share our views and discuss this issue. In view of this lecture on religion and corruption from Islamic perspective, it is to also open the dialogue box that are centered on corruption and possible consequences and actions towards future transformational progress. This is especially crucial as a scholar by name John Mbiti once said, the African is notoriously religious, with Islam and Muslims inclusive. And this opens the discussions as to whether corruption is endemic among Muslim institutions and states. And we will also look at Islam's position on bribery and corruption. In effect, I will also discuss effects of corruption and how it affects people and nations, and whether Islam also teaches and preaches against corruption. Attention will also be paid to some historical antecedents of Islam that might have influence on corruption, and then also look at the way forward. On this note, Mr. Chair, allow me to look at Islam from the belief stand of view. Islam has believed in the total and absoluteness and oneness of Allah, which connotes the worship of the Creator alone. The crux of this philosophical reasoning is that everything should and must have a maker or develop it and cause its existence. With this in mind, it frequently tunes one's mind towards the acceptance of the unity of God, which is the total reliance and belief on the Creator of Allah. And with this in view, the traditional and simple expression of Tawheed is the general view of reality of truth, of the world of space and time, of human history and destiny. This carries the greatest and richest meaning, which has been compressed in one sentence to encapsulate a whole culture, civilization, history, and diversity, wealth of Islam. Again, this makes it imperative for us as believers to believe in the existence of the Creator, and this must actually occupy the general action and conduct of man in every endeavor. As this is stated in Quran 30:30, which says, man should direct himself towards religion, inclining to the truth alone. With reference to the above quotations, it is expected that every reasonable human being or individual tries to make life as meaningful as possible and set a model conduct to suit the expectation of the Creator as caretaker on earth, whose works and deeds will be accounted for. Although corruption may have different views and definitions, it can be defined as a dishonest behavior of an office holder or individual seeking illegitimate gains privately. It includes giving or accepting bribes or inappropriate gifts, laundering money, double dealing, diverting funds, and materials for personal aggrandizement. Islamically, corruption is forbidden and is seen as a sin for a Muslim to give or take bribe. Once the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is quoted to have said, "The curse of Allah be upon the briber and the recipient of bribe." As a Muslim, believing in the accountability should be one of the ultimate goals that must be pursued and reflected upon in every engagement, because Allah has made us caretakers under whose custody businesses, resources of groups, organizations, institutions, or properties of states have been entrusted, and we are expected to conduct or engage in decent transactions devoid of bribery and corruption. In effect, corruption may be a serious barrier to effective mobilization and allocation of national resources for vital needs and policy planning programs, for the eradication of poverty, for sustainable economic development. Corruption can also represent great obstacles to development and stability of a state, which also brings about lower economic growth. Corruption can be identified from different angles, be it economic, moral, religious, mental, social, political, among others. Corruption can be found in situations where civil and public servants will not offer services they have been employed on government or payroll vouchers whose salaries are claimed by others. Ministers and directors of states prepare, inflate budgets in higher percentages just to make gains. Anything that doesn't belong to us. Political leaders and rulers hold on to powers without considering democratic rights of others. And even those who want to ensure that elections take place also use illegal means to win elections by rigging, and to a large extent even cost human lives through brutalities, thereby bringing about hatred and enmity among citizens. Most politicians make promises that never get fulfilled, thereby leaving electorates in great disappointment and regrets. Nepotism is another thing that has eaten into the canker of people. Leaders parade themselves with families around them by giving them appointments in government when they actually do not have the requisite skills and qualifications about that office. This symbolically means putting square pegs in round holes and obviously affecting national policy planning. In the social setup, people have come to believe through families and social expectations that it is good to get rich to meet demands of families and community people, irrespective of the source. This has pushed many public figures to accept that corrupt and illegal of guilt. Religiously, our imams and other Islamic leaders who have been educated deeply into the Quran and the Sunnah hardly practice what they teach, and their attitudes leave much to be desired. Endemic leaders are not just able to speak the truth when they are confronted with such situations. Conducts have affected many leaders of Islamic states, although many of them try hard to put in place policies and laws to deal with corruption. Some countries put into chaotic situations, and citizens and military will have to revolt against their leaders through coup d'etat or demonstrations in registering their displeasure about government's mismanagement. And this raises question as to whether in such states there are indeed Muslims, or it is an Islamic state. If yes, then the question of ethics and whether Islam teaches and preaches against corruption. After Islam has been well established in Mecca and Medina, there came a group of people who, though didn't come as missionaries, but through trade, facilitated the rise and development of Islam in certain parts of Northern and Western Africa. And with that, it established the building of political empires that encouraged trade and wealth. The spread of Islam, which was spread from North Africa to Sub-Saharan Africa, was peaceful and flexible, that it coexisted alongside with the indigenous people and their traditional religions. And this resulted in some indigenous people also played role because some of the chiefs, Muslim clerics, in order to consolidate and expand their territories of kingdoms and empires. These local societies took advantage of Islam as a universal faith in order to foster unity, and subsequently they merged government and religion, which created the atmosphere for strong authority and the growth of patriarchal rule, which was phenomenal. The launch of jihad by Almoravids, the Berber Muslims, to fight against the Arab rule spread Islam. Hereditary monarchy, with their rulers taking the titles of land. Political leadership in African states were the controllers of power and resources within the political territories who were ruling as monarchies, while others rule by lineage, where no elections are held for other members of state to exercise their franchise, until the time came for contemporary African leaders who were made to operate in the colonial legacies to be ruled by constitution. With time, there came the need to adapt alternative political participation, and this notwithstanding, the monopoly of leadership still became the trend in parts of North Africa like Morocco, Tunisia, and other Islamic states. Reports, however, showed that despite the bane in dealing with bribery and corruption, some governments are slowly making conscious efforts to deal with it by trying to implement series of laws and policies to fight corruption in their best way, although the commitment to do it or to enforce it with the seriousness they deserve was wading and fading away, therefore making laws on anti-corruption very ineffective. It is clear also that certain Islamic states are struggling with corruption issues that are connected with governance, probably due to the history of autocratic and monarchical style of leadership. This had reduced trust of citizens in their institutions, and also the shrinking space for civil society and low level of political inclusivity has reduced the belief in the ability of their leaders to make any positive impact. In this case, as we speak, Sudan's present unstable political crisis of coup d'etat is a clear indication that all is not well, due partly to leadership crises that are usually linked with corruption. Guinea inclusive. Global and leadership challenging issues of corruption in many Islamic states is still persisting as obstacles to tackle political corruption, nepotism, and lack of trust in government. Corruption in public service delivery and justice systems are deepening economic crises that have led to protests and instability in many countries on the continent. Corruption has rendered some of the countries unstable and chaotic, despite indication of some reports showing that there has been significant improvement in corruption. However, the issue again that we need to look at is, why is corruption so endemic in Islamic states and societies? If a Muslim is not inclined to the principles that are embedded in the Islamic law, then that Muslim will be regarded as a hypocrite by Allah and by the people, even though he might claim to be a Muslim. This can be related in the hadith by Buhari, where the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, there are 4 characteristics. However, whoever has all of them is a true hypocrite, and whoever has one of them has one of the qualities of a hypocrite until he gives up. And these are: when he is trusted, he betrays; when he speaks, he lies; when he makes a promise, he breaks it; and when he disputes, he resorts to slander. The above hadith goes to buttress the point that a true Muslim with Islamic sensitivities and consciousness will do everything to avoid deceit, cheating, treachery, and lying, no matter what benefits or profits such conduct might bring, because Islam considers those guilty of such deeds to be hypocrites. As Muslims, we must show genuine honesty and respect to lighten up our surroundings with the sincere outlook that will attract others to us, to make way for good deeds in the world, as stated in the hadith. No Muslim individual, situation, court, institution, parliament, state, or Islamic nation is entitled to use its own opinion in matters in which the Quran and the hadith have already given decision on. It would therefore be a contradiction for a Muslim or Islamic state to undertake activities or policies that are not in line with expectations of the people, as stated in Quran chapter 4, verses 105. And Allah says, do not be advocates for deceit. A true Muslim must bow to the expectation of the commandments. And the hadith is dealing with it to ensure that people are trustworthy, respectful, reliable, and truthful in all situations. And now, although we have said some of these references from the hadith and Quran, we want to look critically at the sources that can be drawn again from Islamic perspective in fighting corruption. There is always the fundamental need to work within the laws enshrined in the Quran and hadith of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there are several chapters and verses that have dealt with issues of corruption and how they can guide mankind to stay away from all forms of corrupt practices, together with several hadiths of the Holy Prophet. One classic of such hadith is when the Prophet is said to have narrated or explained that bribery will not appear among any people without them being punished by terror. Bearing this in mind is enough to shake every mankind to stay away from all activities of corruption. Now, again, as Islam and Muslims, do we have any teachings in this Islamic states where corruption is so endemic, and whether something is being done about corruption in such states? Of course, corruption in many Muslim states could be attributed to the fact that we have not prioritized Islam in our everyday activities and moments of reflection. The rituals of Islam might go hand in hand with our moral conduct and behavior. And the Quran are straightforward about our conduct, more especially in the matters of bribery and corruption, which Islam strongly frowns at. Every deed will be accounted for, irrespective of gender, status, age, or title. In these situations, it calls for Muslims to hold firmly onto the Quran, which provides certainty to both men and women. As I refer to Quran chapter 33, verse 36, it calls on men and women to gain nearness to Allah in order to attain spiritual height. In the following thematic areas, first of all, this can be achieved knowing very well that Islam is a complete code of life, thereby trying not to deviate from it is very fundamental. Secondly, it is our duty to believe that sincere obedience to Allah is part of worship, and that should be our guidance and basic principles of Islamic truth. Again, psychologically and intellectually, every believing Muslim should try as much as possible, despite his weakness as a result of the negative influences that corrupt mankind, not to succumb to the challenges and changing desires of demands of the current worldly trends that may shift one's attention from the Creator's commandments. And so, by praying daily, it becomes constant, a reminder to be near your Creator, to stay away from such sins. The next stage in this chapter, in the spiritual journey, every believing Muslim is yearning to identify himself completely with, is the truth, and should be able to face trials and temptations with complete equanimity. The believer is noted to be truthful in his speech, be reliable, honest in all dealings. The tongue should always make pronouncement of which the conscience approves of as the truth without hesitation. In addition, a believing Muslim is readily endures pains, dangers, and other obstacles of losses in life through steadfastness and patience, bearing in mind that Allah will bring ease after every hardship, as stated in Quran chapter 94, verses 5 to 6. Another dimension of a believing Muslim is the expression and exhibition of humility in everyday endeavor in our very existence, which is devoid of pride, arrogance, cheating, and vanity, because there is a strong understanding of the reality of being submissive as a slave of Allah by holding on to the truth. Furthermore, the believing Muslim is conscious of the fact that he's a social being and therefore must not live for himself alone, but rather share whatever Allah has blessed him with the less privileged in the society. And this is where zakat and the general charity are expected to be followed by the Muslim to ensure social equity and bring harmony among the people. The other stage is the emphatic fasting of a believing Muslim, be it obligatory or voluntary. Fasting uplifts one's moral and spiritual development, which helps in guarding against all avenues through which sin can get to the mind for the body to act on. These avenues include bribery and corruption, stealing, cheating, adultery, and fornication. It also ensures sympathy towards fellow human beings. One will not think of dispossessing another person's of his property, wealth, or anything that he depends on for survival in life, or anything that brings development to the entire nation. Fasting is not just starving oneself, but should connote a positive and rewarding spiritual impact in real life situation by the practitioner and the observer. This very last stage forms the climax of the spiritual growth and the development of the believing Muslim, which is to be committed in worship and obeying of commands of Allah. The Muslim should not miss any minute without remembrance of Allah in the heart. That's zikr. It is a conscious effort to know that wherever one may be, Allah is watching over what you do, and it should encourage one to stay away from any sinful engagement. This stage is very crucial for us as Muslims to begin to wage war within our hearts, minds, and souls to purge ourselves of all criminal acts of corruption. The conjunction in the verse is the cardinal principle of the constitutional law of Islam, and it applies to the entire Islamic justice system of life. To conclude my statement, the fact stands without doubt that continuous building of political integrity will bring about exercising political power in the public interest, which implies that decisions are taken with the input of the general public, independent of private interest, and with the intention to sustain the wealth of citizens. Also, improve policies and framework mechanisms needed to enable citizens to access information on government laws and policies and demand accountability and update reports on corruption by governments and states. There must also be the reinforcement of numerous existing anti-corruption commitments and laws, together with other transformative agenda for growth and sustainable development. It means the law must bite severely, and the laws and such policies must be kept at the disposal of the general public so that they will familiarize themselves with it and question whoever falls victim to it. Every individual or leader must be held accountable for any omission or commission under his term of office, and let the law of the state take its course. By this, whoever is found culpable should be dealt with according to the law to purge his or his mind of thinking of corruption. People in leadership should also wage war against their conscience to desist from the desires of craving for. As sincere Muslims, the Quranic injunctions and laws on corruption must be used as terms of reference and conditions of work to serve as code of ethics in working environment, because the Quran is a complete way of life. In addition, in the educational curriculum, where students will be taken through some anti-corruption class in schools. As I'm talking as the chairperson of Ghana Alliance of Faith, made up of 12 different religious groups from both Christian and Islam, the Ghana Faith Alliance has established the integrity class in some selected schools in Ghana called I Shame Corruption. And some understand what corruption are from different perspectives, what constitutes corruption, causes of corruption, and effects of corruption on the nation, society, and even the development of the people. These students have been taken out as ambassadors spreading issues of anti-corruption. And believe you me, the impact they are making is so awesome. Some of them are able to observe their parents' attitudes and characters at home and are able to point out to their parents when they go wrong or when they are on the verge of indulging in corruption. And this is what I want to encourage, that in other nations or states, we should factor into the educational curriculum the anti-corruption club. This will go a long way, because for a child to hear something, he will adhere to it and ensure that whoever is around him or her will also abide by it, irrespective of who that person is. And I want to strongly encourage engaging school children in the fight against corruption. On this note, I want to say a big thank you for this opportunity to also share my view and bring my opinion on. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa barakatuh. Thank you, Ajia Aisha, too. We are so thankful. Again, you have also highlighted some real practical challenges from corruption in political and administrative level, like Dr. Hafiz did, and also bringing it back again to the younger generation. I have always joked that as for our generation, it's a lost cause. I don't know what you can do to our generation apart from locking us up. But what do we do with the younger generation when it comes to corruption? And what is the role of the church and the mosque in passing on some of these values that we talked about? So thank you all. We are going to take a few questions. I already have some here that have come in. And if you have a question, please put it in the chat and you can direct it to one of the speakers or to both of them, and we will address it to them and give them time to respond briefly so that we can have more questions if there are. Dr. Hafiz, there is this question for you. Religion in Africa is considered sacred. Both of you underscored that. Many of the persons involved in corrupt practices share belief between Christianity and Islam in Africa. Considering the clarity of your presentation on how Islam condemns corruption, how practically, and I think the line is under practically, can change be influenced through Islamic belief?
Part of the answer has been provided in the presentation given by Hajiya Aisha. You know, the challenge with the Christian and Muslim leaders who ascend to political positions is always that as soon as they go into politics, they start invoking sayings like, give Caesar what belongs to Caesar and God what belongs to God. And in this case, they are trying to divorce religion from their political career. So in such a situation, what I could think about, how can we effect this into a practical change, is that we can try as much as possible to follow a gradual approach or a gradual process, which can be taken to translate the Islamic texts into practice. For instance, this might include intensifying the efforts of ensuring that there is a contact between the courageous religious leaders and such political leaders. Also, in my presentation, I made it as one of the recommendations that such leaders need regular kinds of workshops. I have an experience. I studied my PhD in Pakistan, which is in South Asia. But one of the initiatives that are being carried out, they have an establishment known as the Da'wah Academy. They also have another one which is called the Sharia Academy. And part of the roles that are being carried out by these two academies is to call political leaders, irrespective of their religious and political affiliations, to several workshops, from time and again, handling different issues. And I think to a great extent, I don't know what are the statistics of corruption in Pakistan. By the time I was there, in one or another, such initiatives contributed to scaling down the immoral tendencies that are always seen within the political leaders. So, in order to translate the Islamic teachings into practice, such establishments have to be put into consideration. But you should also be mindful of the fact that we are handling a human being, and therefore a gradual process is needed. So this is one of the ways that I could think about, that we need such people to try as much as possible to bring them closer to the Islamic teachings, whereby at least their moral integrity can be checked. Their moral integrity can be reformed from time and again. And of course, in addition to other initiatives that have been addressed by my sister, Hajia Aisha. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doctor. We appreciate your comments. And I don't know whether Hajia has something to say about how can we practicalize this. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Prof. I think I've said quite a lot, and he has also made some recommendations. But one thing I want us to bear in mind as Muslims is that the religion or the practice of Islam is becoming too ritualistic for us to concentrate on the conscience of the believer, that whatever we practice should be part and parcel of our life. If, for instance, you have to pray 5 times daily, fast during Ramadan, give zakat, what is the implication? Is to make sure that you live in cordial relationship with your neighbors. But before then, you must satisfy your conscience that whatever you are doing, in open or secret, is practically in accordance with the dictates of Islam. So we should not just think praying 5 times, giving zakat and fast. No. We should begin to wage war in our hearts sincerely to check ourselves whether we are on the pedestal of Islam, doing the right thing. It is only when we wage war within our souls and hearts that we can come out boldly and do the needful. Again, I cited some portion of school curriculum being included with the anti-corruption issues. I think there's a saying that goes that out of sight, out of mind. We can inscribe some of these Quranic chapters and verses that deal with corruption or all negative tendencies in our society, paste them at vantage points where most people pass, not just the mosque, so that wherever you pass, as many times as you pass there, you will be reading some of these quotations and verses. And through that, it will also remind us about some of our conduct in order to do the needful. Thirdly, I think, yes, the workshops and those things are good. But when they leave the workshop, what next? The imams should make an action plan that before any imam mounts the pulpit, he will use 5 or 10 minutes to discuss corruption, its effects and consequences for the hearing of the audience, so that it will echo something in their ears And I think gradually, same applies to the schools. Like I said, we should make part of the organizational ethical code from the Quranic quotation. And before you are employed, it will be given to you. You read it before you sign for the contract. Later, if you fall victim to that, then this is where you must be dealt with severely. And I mean severely. Although we know in certain parts of Saudi and those things, there's cutting of hand and those things. It's not necessarily killing the person or cutting the hand, but we can look at something that will be of benefit within that society that will humiliate the wrongdoer in order to stay away from it. I think with this, we can make headway. And practically, we should make sure we shouldn't just claim to be Muslims because we pray and fast. We should wage war within our heart and conscience. And this will go a long way to help us to deal with some of these challenges.
Thank you so much, Harashia. That is very clear. And I really hope that if we can do this, I don't know whether sermons, khutbahs, and Bible verses and Quranic verses will do the trick. But I think that at least it pricks people's conscience. We need to begin with those kinds of teachings. Imam Kazozi has a question.
Thank you very much. Could I say good evening? Because where I am is good evening. I'm calling from Kampala, Uganda.
Thank you.
I am thanking the presenters. I want to raise two issues. According to Haja, she says that we should not only stop at preaching to the people, or people must not stop at performing the rituals. You see, the purpose of these rituals in our life is to change our inner heart to be on the straight path. For example, in Islam, the Quran is very specific and clear that indeed prayer stops a person from doing evil and wrong things. So the moment your prayer, your fasting, your other rituals have not changed your heart towards what is negative and what is bad, then it means you are only participating in prayer, you have not performed the real worship. Therefore, the weakness, why we go to church, we go to mosques, we listen to the preachers, and we continue doing what is wrong, is because we have not practically accepted what we are doing that is part and parcel of our life. On the political scene, what is the contribution of the population, again, in encouraging corruption? The population, the people, the communities in which we live are actually the spearheaders of corruption because they themselves have accepted it and they even think it is not, you cannot change it. I have had issues with some students, my students, when I tell them that this is a bad practice, then they will tell you, can you change the world alone? Then I tell them that Jesus, Muhammad, and all the prophets, they were single people, but they changed societies because people accepted. But for the African case, corruption, like the one I saw, somebody put that even across ECOWAS boundaries, in order to cross, you have to do what we call in East Africa here, kintu kidogo, something small or something simple to make you cross the border. Why is the problem? It is because of the leaders. You see, African leaders have three basic characteristics, and I want you to critically look at them. Number one, and all these characteristics, all of them encourage corruption. Number one, they fear the people they lead, and because of that fear, in order to put them on their side, they corrupt them. Number two, they cheat us. See, look at your leaders, or the fearing itself. Look at the motorcades. The other day I counted our president here, he was moving with 31 vehicles. What is that? That is a sign of corruption. Two, out of fear. The second thing is they lie us. They tell us a lot of lies on issues, and because of that, their minds are corrupted, and the people also become corrupted. And even when you come to the church or to the mosque and you preach to the people, they ask the question, is this one bigger than the other head of state or minister or commissioner who has done this? So they cheat us, they lie to us, and they fear us. Okay, the cheating, the lying, and the fear that our leaders have, whether political or otherwise, are key issues in enhancing fighting corruption.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that is so helpful. If you start a series of khutbahs in your mosque on corruption, maybe you will get a visit from the authorities because they'll say you're causing trouble. So you're right, the fear, but also the lies and how we model these things in the public sphere for our younger generation. There's a very important question here. How can we fight this as people of faith across religious boundaries? How can different faith groups come together to see corruption as a problem that affects everybody in society and fight it together?
As religious people, what I can say is that we are different religious people, but we are crying the same, we are sharing the same tears of struggling for morality and peace on earth. There can be peace on earth when we all have peace. We understand each other. There is social harmony. And like I said in my presentation, it will make a strong determination if religious groups come together to deal with the issue of corruption. I cite Ghana as an example. We are over 13 religious groups, both Christian and Muslims and other faith-based organizations. We have come together to form the Ghana Faith Alliance. And one most important project that we undertook was a project on anti-corruption, where we wrote a book with some cards and adapted some selected schools in Ghana. We hired facilitators and established this anti-corruption class in such schools. And the children were made or were taken through some issues of corruption, causes, effects, and how to avoid it. And to tell you honestly, Ghana Faith Alliance, through that, has won the admiration of Star Ghana, who has sponsored us to undertake another project on corruption. And when we went back, did a follow-up, when you talk to a school pupil of maybe primary 3 or 4, who is part of the program, he will tell you, I normally watch my mother doing this, and I will tell her it's an act of corruption. So ask them, what was the reaction of your mother or your father? Sometimes they say they will beat them. A child doesn't talk like that. But this is just the beginning. Directly or indirectly, they are conscientizing the parents and drawing their attention on some of the little things that they do that culminate into corruption. We know it's corruption all over. Even the imam cannot stand on the pulpit and frequently preach about corruption. But gradually, it will sink down. Even if not all, there are some who will sincerely imbibe it and work with it. And if we get 1 or 2 people working with it, gradually these people will replicate it at home, at the family level, societal level, and at the national level. It will get somewhere. It will be difficult, but we have to start from somewhere. Another issue is understanding ourselves as religious people. If we understand that unity that binds us as religious people, we'll go every end to make sure that we'll stay together. In some countries, I don't know, but in Ghana, we don't have that challenges of Christian-Muslim relationship. Another issue is to ensure contentment. If we tell ourselves, I'm okay with the little I have, gradually we'll make impacts. Because sometimes the issue of corruption comes with several needs beyond our means, which pushes us into certain situations that we will be grabbing things that we don't have to. So, like I said, we as individuals need to start something from our minds, our souls, and our hearts. If we really, and we are sure we want to be true religious people, before someone even calls you, think of the next thing you are doing. That should be a personal assignment we should put for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hazia. We want to thank our brother all the way from Jamaica, the land of the Jah Rastafarians. Thank you for your comment. Dr. Hafiz, do you want to say something briefly about how interreligiously we can engage in the fight of corruption, against corruption?
Okay, my humble contribution, it is just an addition to what Hadia has said. At the moment, we are already having some interreligious congregations whereby people from different religious denominations come together to discuss the things that bring us together. So I have a belief that if fighting corruption is made part of the agenda that can be put ahead in these interreligious meetings, I believe that this shall be a very strong step towards fighting corruption, because it is almost unanimous. It is a unanimous agreement that there is no any religion that condones to corruption. So you find out that the same way it is prohibited in Christianity, it is the same way it's prohibited in Islam. So my feeling is that we just need to put fighting corruption at the highest of our agendas in our deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's the challenge that you have thrown to us, and the Sane Institute will look into that, and we will bring our Muslim and Christian leaders at some point together in one room and lock us up for 3-4 days to work out something on the fight against corruption together. That would be good. That would be good. Hazia, a question is asked: how do we fight in our heart? How do we go about bringing about change in a person's heart? How can we do that? And Dr. Hafiz also, they said if you can clarify, because we talked about corruption is not inherent in Africa, but has been acquired. If you can clarify that, and we have about 2-3 minutes so that we can wrap up.
When I said we should wage war from our hearts, it needs deep and committed reflections in our own sober periods and moods. We need that deep and committed reflections. For instance, in your day-to-day activities, sit down quietly and ask yourself, how did my activities for the day go? I did this, I did that. No, this one was not done correctly. I collected this money that I'm not supposed to have collected. Why did I do that? This is what I'm saying. We should need that wage war within our hearts by deeply reflecting on some of our activities daily, weekly, by every minute, and assess the impact or the effect. If we really know it's not good, then we should make a commitment to change for the better. It won't be a one-day affair. Sometimes you make the commitment, but you cannot fulfill it. You may end up falling into another, what do we call it, sin. But that doesn't mean you should not continue to reflect. Yes, we need that solemn individual internalization of our activities, and then assess everything that we do, so that we should be able to distinguish from what was good and what was bad, and then make the commitment for a change. Again, like I said, we should ensure and encourage and practice self-contentment. If you are content with the little you have, you will not think of having what your neighbor has when you actually don't have the means. We should actually practicalize self-contentment, and with that, we will be able to achieve fighting the evil in our hearts.
Thank you so much, Azia. Thank you. Dr. Hafiz, can you clarify a bit on what you meant by acquired and not inherent?
Thank you, Dr. John Zuma. What I meant here is that when you look at some of the attributes or some of the characteristics, some of them are naturally endued, yet others are just acquired. This is where you are having a discussion, the psychological discussion of the nature versus the nurture. So what I mean here is that if our forefathers I brought this out of the incident in which I narrated that the first contact of Islam and Christianity on the African continent revealed that corruption is not welcome. So it means that when we go back to our heritage, when we go back to our history, it is not founded. Our forefathers have already made a clear stand against it. So it has been acquired through subsequent generations, and therefore, if it is not inherent, if it is not naturally inbuilt in us, if it has been rejected by our forefathers, it means that it is easier to fight by changing our tendencies. It is easier because corruption is a choice. So the moment you reject that choice, then you can go a long way to clear yourself and even to clear the community that you are living in. That's what I meant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you for our friend John Fode from all the way from Dakar, Senegal, and for your very helpful comments. And Imam Kazozi, thank you so much for your very helpful comments and contributions. And I think one of the things that we also want to do, Hajia, we thank you for the resource that you flagged. I'm going to be in touch with you to discuss how we can lay our hands on that and see how we can work in terms of producing some of these manuals for use in our mosques and in our churches to fight against corruption. So I'll be in touch with you. Thank you. Dr. Hafiz, I'm so grateful, and we are deeply indebted to you for joining us all the way from Uganda. I'm sure you are in Kampala or wherever you are in Uganda. We thank you so much. One of the things that I worried about also when it comes to corruption is what Dr. Hafiz says about acquired and not inherited. Sometimes I wonder whether our multi-party political system has contributed in corrupting society further, because the politicians want vote, they have party politics has corrupted certain institutions that were sacred. The chieftaincy institutions in Ghana and I guess in elsewhere have been corrupted by multi-party interferences. The media that is supposed to be the watchdog have been corrupted, and they are now card-bearing members who are journalists. And the churches and the mosques have not been spared because of what Imam Kazozi says also. We fall at the feet of the politicians. And I want to say that this discussion will not end online. We will find ways of making it an in-person discussion between Muslim and Christian leaders in Africa for us to find ways of fighting corruption together. I want to thank again our partners from Yale, Mike and his group at the Macmillan Center for this partnership. Next month, we have a hot topic, and I hope that you will join us. And next month, the topic is on the whole question of Boko Haram. Is it an Islamic group or is it a terrorist group? We want to discuss that together next month. So please join us next month if you can. And the month after, we are going to have a look at the pacifist tradition of Islam in West Africa, especially what Hajia was alluding to, the fighting from in our hearts. Some of those teachings also are very much a part of Islam. We want to explore that also in December. So thank you for joining us, and we'll be in touch. God willing, alhamdulillah, inshallah, all the best, and we'll see you soon again. Bye-bye.